The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telly Moods by eClapper Project Inc. Telly Moods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telly Moods today.
This is the Movie Health Podcast where we talk about movies and mental health. This is Catherine.
This is AJ.
Today we speak to Amy English, an accredited mental health social worker currently supporting a private practice in Maitland, New South Wales as a practice partner and therapist at Seaver House. She is experienced in working with child protection matters, violence, abuse and complex trauma, holding positions in New South Wales Health, New South Wales and Queensland Education and the NGO sector. The positions she's held were inclusive of child protection counselling, child and family casework, case management and a school counsellor. Welcome, Amy.
Hello. Hi, Catherine. Hi, AJ.
Hey, Amy.
It's so good to speak to you, Amy. I know that I reached out to you because I heard you speak at another podcast, which was really great. And today we speak about one of your favorite films, Parasite, directed by Bong Joon-ho. Was in 2019. It received many awards. I'm just wondering if you wanted to do a little introduction of it and what resonated with you about this film.
Yeah, I am probably the reason that I wanted to pick Parasite was because it was quite a breakout film in terms of reaching mainstream media as a South Korean film. What stood out for me in Parasite was, there's so many layers, and I'm by no means a cinematographer or director or anything like that. But what struck me was how many layers of nuance there was in that film that the director so cleverly was able to show glimpses of throughout the audience that spoke to class structure, power, and I think the biggest question is who were the parasites in the film, which I'm interested in having a chat with you both about.
Yeah, so I know that Bong Joon-ho, he also did Snowpiercer. I love that movie, and that's also very much about societal structure.
Yeah.
I actually watched the black and white version on YouTube because apparently that's what the director preferred for Parasite.
Oh, wow.
So that was a fascinating experience. It was as good as color. I think it's just such a powerful film, and yet there is just so much complexity to it. And I understood when All the Rage came out, and I was like, oh, I need to watch this film. I'd call it a scary comedy, I guess, without spoiling much. The narrative does shift. The genre actually changes, like literally halfway through the film with a single doorbell ring. And a lot of people call it a work of art, a masterpiece, flawless. Like there's so many reviews about it, and I've seen some and like many analyses and reviews of the actual film. With the question of who the parasite is, I know that I've read and I kind of agree that in some point of the film every character is a parasite. And I think that's really fascinating. I'm curious, like, do you think that there was like a main parasite in the movie? Or like, is it the like each? I know there's the Kim family, there's the Park family, and then there's obviously like each member within it. But did you have a particular perspective on that?
Yeah, I sort of sat away thinking about who is the parasite here, and what did the director want us to see, and what did he want to shed a light on? And it reminds me of films like Get Out. With being able to see how different minority groups or different groups in society were preyed on. Thinking about the Park and the Kim family, I actually wondered whether the parasite was the class structure and whether it was the government, because there was some really cleverly hinted nuances and also lines in the film where it was saying, we're in this semi-basement. This is, the smell of the Kim family that was picked up on the Park family. There was, those lines of, wow, this lawn's really lovely, and the original housekeeper saying the rest of the house is lovely. And what struck me as well was the scene with the original housekeeper's husband saying, where else was I meant to live? There was no pension for me. There's loan sharks out for me. And you think about loan sharks being parasites and what brought them to to be able to prey on this family, to be able to take their money to go into hiding. And then at the end, it's such a poignant scene of the son of the Kim family saying, "This is my plan after seeing the Morse code. I'm going to get rich. I'm going to buy the
Yeah.
house." Basically, so no one can ever threaten our family again. But how many steps go into that, and how many opportunities are open to him being of a family of a lower class with very little financial resources to back him up? So yeah,
Hmm.
that's a great question, Catherine. I'm still sitting here mulling it over, but for now, my answer is probably the government and the class structure that
Mm.
exists in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, that's very insightful, actually. I didn't think of that, but that's so true.
Yeah,
The thing is, with the Kim family, obviously, they had to be very resourceful,
yeah,
um, with what they had, and it was fascinating how they all ended up replacing the staff of the Park family. In terms of
yeah,
being the English and art tutors, the driver, and the housekeeper. I thought that was a stroke of
yeah,
genius.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and yeah, I think, I remember reading a comment on YouTube that said that the film shows how the poor survive off the rich and the rich live off the poor. So it's
Mm,
kind of like
mm,
this symbiosis, like it's like this cycle that
mm.
continues in society. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a bit like, so I'm bringing other movies in. It's a bit like Venom, isn't it?
Mm,
When they can't exist without each other and they miss each other. The mom of the Park family, she has no idea with her children. She's got very little relationship and
mm,
understanding. And it's sort of at the request of the Kim family, just keep them moving along, keep them ticking, make sure they're happy. And that was alluded when, the son first was introduced as the tutor to her daughter and saying, it's not about grades. We just want to make sure she's happy. Do you understand what I'm saying?
mhm.
That was a really heavy moment where I think, the son of the Kim family went, okay, I'm getting what you're saying. I just need to be a pacifier.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
what you mentioned was very true, how the mum of the Park family was very disconnected from her children,
Yeah.
while the mum of the Kim family, like both parents actually, they had a very like fun dynamic amongst them. And I guess it lended to the humor of the film, which was great. There were so many scenes. Obviously, there's many like masterful frames in the film and like an excellent score. And I know that some people say how the house is itself a character.
Yeah.
There's the
Yeah.
visual architecture of it. It's such a visual language that we
Yeah.
watch in this film. And, obviously, halfway through the film, it's actually literally halfway in the screenplay as well, page 71 out of 142, where
Yeah.
the former housekeeper says, I forgot something in the basement under the kitchen. And it's like, it's so foreboding that, okay, like we know that something's going to happen, but we don't know
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
Um, and like I'm wondering like how did you feel at that point? I don't know, like if you want to talk about the first time you watched the film or like in terms of how many times you've seen it,
Yeah.
how that midpoint of the movie kind of plays up for you.
Yeah. I love movies, Catherine. I think when we first caught up, I told you I was initiated into the horror genre very young, but having a mum
Mhm.
who um, grew up probably in the 50s and 60s. So come the 70s and 80s, it was right into Stephen King. So horror genre is something that doesn't scare me. It's quite familiar, which sounds a little bit sick when I say that, doesn't it?
Not
What
at
a
all, not at all.
comforting.
Horror movies are cathartic.
Yes,
Yes, they are. They
absolutely.
truly
And it
are.
talks to a raw vulnerability that other genres
Mhm.
probably don't have. And, you know, self-disclosure, when I first watched Parasite, I thought, I want to see what this is all about. I see movies as being and series as being, particularly foreign movies and series, as seeing a window into what the culture actually is trying to say and what the experience is. So
Mhm.
having a Korean film, and I mentioned before, Catherine, I'm an intercountry adoptee. So I saw this sort of as a window into going, oh, what is this experience about? What dynamics do happen in Korea as a
Mhm.
country of origin? So when I watched it, I didn't have any expectations. I just heard that everyone had
Mhm.
raved about it. So I thought, funny me going, we'll see how this goes. I like Snowpiercer, but how many hits can this director actually have? Well, I was
Yeah,
firmly put in
yeah.
my place, wasn't it? Because it blew me away. It's one of those movies that just
Yes.
stayed with me. And
Mm.
I think that's the same with books and movies. There are some that just stay with you. And I think,
Yeah,
the
definitely.
first movie you and I both bonded over was The Shining. That was a movie
Yeah.
that stayed with me.
Hmm.
What
Yeah.
about you, AJ? Do you have any movies that just stay with you?
Well, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I was about to say that for some reason when I rewatched Parasite this week, I mean, it was such a force when it was released back in 2019. You know, everyone had known about um, Bong Joon Ho's movies before, so he was a known entity. But
Mm,
the movie itself was such a force through critics and audiences, and but then at the same time was a bit of a surprise because it was a foreign film
yeah.
at the Oscars, and I probably hadn't watched it since around that time, so it'd been a while since I'd rewatched it, and I'd remembered parts of the movie. But then I'd forgotten parts of it somehow.
Mm.
And so when I watched it again, it was such a roller coaster because I was like, oh yeah, right, that's what happens. And to your point before, Catherine, about the house is very much a character of the movie. The way it's um, it's integral to both families.
Hmm.
And I think what what I remembered, and then what was super evident when I started watching it again, was the characters and the casting. And I think a lot of the time, all the movies that really resonate with us, and that we connect with and remember and rewatch. I mean, it sounds pretty basic, but it does come down to obviously the characters, but the casting. So it just seems as though,
Mm.
even though you hadn't, I'd seen Snowpiercer before. I'd seen Snowpiercer. I think I'd seen Mother, another one of Ho's movies. Uh, but I hadn't really seen many of the other actors before, and it just seemed like all the actors were perfectly cast for the role they needed to play within the movie. So that was one thing that I suppose I took away from the last time I saw it. But for me personally, uh, that actually happens quite a bit in horror movies. My favorite horror movies, and for some reason I don't know why, I keep some of my favorite horror movies are Rob Zombie horror movies, and a lot of people,
Yeah. House of
it's
a
so
Thousand Corpses. Yep.
yeah, exactly. And for some reason, that doesn't gel with a lot of people. I think Rob Zombie's quite polarizing, maybe because there's quite a
Mm.
few people out there that just know him for his music, and he started strong with his movies, and then it's been slightly a diminishing return with his more recent movies. But I love his initial horror movies because of the characters.
Mm.
So you have Sig Hayes as Spaulding the Clown. You have Sherry Moon as the crazy daughter. You have a whole range of what's the Bill Mosey as the super creepy son of the super creepy family. If you haven't seen House of Thousand Corpses, just go and see it. I watch it every Halloween. And we're not here to talk
Mm.
about horror movies. We're here to talk about Parasite. But I think there is
Yeah.
something particular about Parasite, the way it was casted, and everyone
Yeah.
plays that perfect role. And because it's such a dynamic film where one family's integrating the other family, and then throughout the film, you're always asking yourself, what is the message? Is it about
Mm.
equality? Is it about class? Who's the parasite? And so it does really make you think. But yeah, I mean, characters and the casting is big for me, and that's what resonates. And to answer your question, maybe in a long-winded way, they ended up, that ends up being for me some of the reasons why I go back and visit some movies and they resonate with me is just the
Yeah.
characters and the casting.
It it might surprise you as well, AJ, and some of the characters, particularly the daughter, um,
Hmm.
the
Mm.
son of the Kim family, and also believe the mother. And this is just going off memory. They're quite well known in Korea for either coming of age or romantic comedy movies. So this was,
Oh.
I
All
think,
right.
a step outside of that very popular genre in Korea, to step into
Mm-hmm.
something a bit more dark and complex, which I think they nailed.
Mm.
Particularly the son and the daughter. I thought they were just genius in the way that, even how a cigarette was dangled as she's in an internet cafe forging away all the certificates and documents. There was an arrogance around her that allowed her to play off the art therapist so beautifully, because who was
Yeah.
going to question her? She had so much command of that
Mm.
family, the Park family. But sorry, excuse me. You go, AJ.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah, but like I think even the mother,
Mm,
I think so. The son
yeah, yeah.
is presented with the opportunity from his friend Min. I
Mm,
can
mm,
appropriately pronounce that one. And talks about the mother being simple.
mm,
And then you meet
Yeah.
the mother, and you can go, yeah, okay, she's simple, but she's of a certain class, and
yeah,
just does it so perfectly as a wealthy housewife. But from the very beginning, when you meet the Kim family, you very quickly understand the motivations of the character, and
yeah.
you get, I suppose, an introduction of the motivations of the character. And so, for example, with the father, there were moments like they're sitting down in their basement apartment, and there's fumigation happening on the
Mm.
street,
Mm,
and they're observing this fumigation, and they're looking at this man fumigating the street as sort of as it's not entertainment but something of interest. And he starts fumigating, and then the father goes, I think the mother or the daughter says, "Oh, should we shut the window?" And he goes, "No, no, no, free
mm,
fumigation." And then the smoke goes in, and then they inhale it all, and you're
Wow.
like, okay, all right. So there is obviously a challenge here socio-economically, and they want to take the opportunity of the fumigation. But then also when the daughter's forging the academic documents for the son
Mm.
to then go apply for the job, and the father says, you could go to Oxford for forgery. And so there's like sort of this this proud moment of something opportunistic and illegal
mm,
ultimately. But very quickly you get a sense of some of the certainly the father's motivations. And the fascinating thing about the movie is that they actually change quite significantly as you go along, and things like the smells and
mm,
the way that the family and the father observe the other, the Kim family, is what changes, and then their motivations change. But yeah, no, I thought, yeah, that was a moment where you really get a sense of the motivation of the characters in the
mm.
in the family.
And the house placement is
Mm,
the Park family's house is in the hills. That's and then the semi basement, which is it's like heaven and purgatory, really, isn't it? Because the
Mm.
semi basements exist, and a lot of people are forced to live underground because that is the only affordable housing. Like they're even below, whether it's purgatory or whether it's hell, they're below everyday life where everyone's walking over them. That's so clever to have, the drunk people walk down the street, that they're not even at eye level or higher than these people.
mm,
That was really cleverly
Yeah.
done, I think.
There's also commentary that anytime a character walked upstairs, it was a rise in social class, and then anyone descending
Mm,
was the opposite. And it was interesting how the flood, both families
yeah.
perceived it differently. The rich family thought it was a blessing, and then obviously it was a disaster for the lower class family. I have a question for you both. I'm wondering what you think how like near the beginning, the son's friend gives him a rock that he kind of clings onto, and it is very symbolic. So, what do you think that symbolizes?
the
That's a good.
scholars, yeah, they call it a rock and a stone. I actually made note of that as well. The scholar's stone, I think it's referred to at
Mm,
some point. Given by Min. I think it was his
yeah.
Mm,
grandfather who collects them. Yeah, I
mm,
think
Mm,
there's certainly a deeper cultural meaning to the rock that
mm,
probably deserves some research. But it is mentioned as a symbol, or it brings wealth to
yeah.
mm,
families. And
yeah.
it might be a bit of a not a MacGuffin, but it's certainly it gives the movie some. It gives the family some motivation, and then certainly motivation to start strategizing, and then, figuring out how they can ultimately, get that first job with the family and then start to get other jobs within the family. But it does come in and out of the movie quite a bit. So it's, it's obviously in there
Yeah.
at the start, and then his son rescues it. But I was thinking that, I was wondering that as well, because it ultimately becomes a detriment to the family towards the end.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Amy?
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Was it a detriment or was it a life-saving ring? Because I know that it was used brutally at the end, but was it from the start? Was the symbolism sort of the family's permission to break social norm and go after what they deserved or what they should have been entitled to in the first place? Because I think it was such a great scene when the son puts it back. I mean, puts it into the river to hide the evidence, basically, of murder. And wow, that rock really just fit in. You wouldn't have even known that it was, not belonging to the riverbed. It's almost like a full circle moment of saying, we've used every ounce, every inch of what this rock intended for us or what it represented. So now we're giving it back. But yeah, I don't know what it's a symbol of. Why don't we have her here to tell us? Come on, Ho, don't be selfish.
Yeah, one day we'll be interviewing famous directors. You watch this space, Amy. It's
Will you
it's going
make
to
sure
happen.
you put my episodes before them and not after them, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, you'll be involved. You'll be involved. We'll invite guests back, and you'll help interview
Ho, yeah.
famous directors. I mean, to follow on that, and a big theme that I noticed within the movie, or big concept that I noticed in the movie, particularly in the second half. And so, I suppose the last two thirds in the first third, so that, I suppose the first act, where there was the introduction of the scholar's stone, and then that helped, let's just call it, the family to ultimately integrate themselves in the Park family. But then once they're in, and all working for the Park family and done their devious deeds to slowly, and I think for people who haven't seen Parasite, should definitely watch it, because it's very cleverly designed and very cleverly written, the way that each of the characters will, infiltrated the Park family's house. But this concept of having a plan kept coming up. I don't know if you noticed it. So the
Yeah.
son and they established a plan, sort of step by step, or piece by piece. So started with the son, then the daughter, and then I think the father, then the mother, to infiltrate, become part of the Parks family. And then as things started to go a little haywire, they started to revisit this plan. In particular, the son wanted to always know what the plan was until, you know, the heavy rain and the incident at the house. When they're at their sort of their lowest after the rain, the house is flooded and they're in the shelter and they're sleeping on the floor. The father says, if you have no plan, nothing goes wrong.
Well, that's right.
Which, which is pretty bleak stuff. So what was your interpretation, or how do you see the importance of that concept within the movie, and then, even maybe within your work, Catherine and Amy?
Okay, yeah. So I thought that was really profound, and it's definitely a theme that goes throughout the whole film. In terms of work, it's really interesting because I think there's a balance, right, where we want to be able to deal with challenges as they come, because life challenges are unpredictable, and we can't prepare for everything. But I think having a good foundation, whether it's seeking therapy or having good social connections, it's all these things that we've talked about in previous episodes as well, and I guess what you and I, Amy, kind of speak to our clients about. Whether it's a crisis plan, it's kind of like an intervention, or at least it's prevention. It's prevention rather. Just having a plan around our mental health and looking after it. I think that's really important, but also just being aware that it's something we also build through experience.
Yeah.
So it's like we find our resilience from actually experiencing difficult circumstances that we haven't in the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And similar to that, when we look at tenets such as the tenets of therapies and modalities such as acceptance and commitment therapy, the whole premise of that is being able to sit in an uncomfortable space and allow the experience to pass us by, to be comfortable in being uncomfortable, and knowing that that's a part of the human condition and experience, that it's not anything that we need to shy away from at times. I mean, the whole we need to have a plan, and yeah, it was such a great theme that kept coming back for the Kim family. What's the plan now, Dad? What's the plan now? In crisis, so many of our clients will come to us and say, what do I do now? What do I do now? And really, I guess in therapies that I use, it's not so much what do we do now, but let's take stock in what do the parts of you need now? What do they want us to know now? So it's always flexible. And I think the line was very cleverly added by the dad saying, when you don't have a plan, you can't be disappointed. I've just looked up the Scholar Stone, and I think both of you will be really interested in this, because it was, once you raised that age, I was like, what is that about? I want to know. So the Scholar Stone's culturally significant in terms of good luck, but the connection to the film's plot and thematic fabric is very deceptive, because in the scene where the semi-basement gets flooded, and you know how they pick up the stone? It's floating because it's hollow and fake. So the stone that was given to him was fake in the first place, and it represents that, class, the idea of being able to move up. It's all, and social mobility in a capitalistic society is an empty promise. So I think the Scholar Stone was representing what seems, like a good thing on the outside can be deceptively fake when you get to the bottom of it. Mm.
That's a bit harsh. I mean, I suppose, could you read into the way, was it Min, the son's friend from the Park family, gifted him the Scholar Stone, and the fact that it was fake? Did that give him sort of a false sense of,
It was like a
I don't know,
placebo effect,
belief?
wasn't it? It was good things to
Yeah.
happen
Oh,
to
yeah.
us. It was like permission. That's the way that I'm interpreting it. The family receiving this stone, it was almost permission of good things can happen to us, and maybe we just need to take it. Whereas after the flooding and the plans start to unravel and the deception starts to be stretched pretty thin, that's when they discover that the rock's fake, and the turning point of the family going, what's the plan now? Is everything that we sort of sacrificed for and to try and get into this family, is it really not worth it in the end? Can I ask both of you a question, if that's right, Catherine and AJ? When we think about psychological thrillers and the horror genre, and there's such polarization, you might have friends that go, oh, I don't watch scary movies at all, no thank you, and there's others that are obsessed with them. What do you think? I'm interested to know, what do you both think it is about psychological thrillers and the horror genre that make people so uncomfortable? Because when we think about therapy, Catherine, it is uncomfortable. Therapy is uncomfortable as well, and it gets similar rap, doesn't it? Others love it and swear by it, and others are like, no, I'm not going to go see someone.
Not going there.
Yeah. I'm interested to know both your thoughts.
Do you want to go first, AJ?
I don't know if this is the answer, but I think there is something about internalizing and externalizing things that you experience. So for me, I've always been, drawn to and fascinated by horror movies because of the characters. So think of Freddy Krueger, think of Jason, Halloween. They all have this harrowing,
Story?
imposing. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I just said backstory. No.
Yeah. They have this big character in the middle of it, and so you're drawn to this big character, and then they go off and do all sorts of things within the movie. Within the genre itself, there's terrible things that happens, and I've never really thought any deeper and not internalized what's happening on screen, particularly within thrillers and horrors. So when within Halloween, when the Shape goes on a rampage, it's pretty harrowing stuff, pretty graphic stuff, but it's surface deep for me. Whereas I can think of people, like my wife, for example, who will watch some, and for me, I can, not think about it anymore after the movie, other than it was a really cool experience, and then go to sleep and do it again the next day. And I think my wife, for example, will internalize what just happened and think about it more and not be able to handle the experience, during the experience or after the experience. So I'm not an expert, certainly an expert in therapy, but there is something about how you experience the genre, if we're grounding it on horror/thriller, and the level in which you internalize or externalize that experience. I suppose my
Yeah.
my reaction,
Yeah.
Catherine.
Yeah, so I like what you said about internalizing and externalizing. It's funny, Amy, that you mentioned. So we can say that watching horror is confronting, like therapy sessions. Like that's so
I
interesting.
hope that my clients
I
don't
think
feel
for
like it's
me,
a horror movie session with me. If not, if any of them are
yeah,
listening, please
hopefully
give me
not.
that feedback.
Same. But yeah, I think I've always been drawn to horror because there is something clever about it, and people don't actually give it enough credit for like the
Yeah.
depth of it sometimes. And I think there is a lot of themes of
Mm,
trauma actually within like psychological thrillers that I guess people see at face value. People watch it for entertainment, and it is in a contained environment as well. And yeah, we remind ourselves that it's not real and all of that. But I think, I mean, just personally for me anyway, and people I know who love horror, which is inclusive of the two of you as well. I think maybe we like feeling the fear.
mm,
I don't know, like we like the adrenaline that comes with it, the intensity. Like I'm someone who's drawn to like very intense
mm,
experiences. So it's like, well, of course it makes sense that horror is something that I like. And and that's just indicative of many experiences in my life. So I think it's interesting because the current clients who I work with also love horror. So they're very open to
yeah.
therapy. They're open to being
Yeah.
uncomfortable and being confronted and
Yeah.
challenged, and they also like the experience of watching a horror movie. So
There's
maybe
a
there is a
thing.
connect there. I don't know. Yeah, there's a thing. Maybe we should research that. But I think also horror has very powerful
Yeah.
imagery and sound. Like it's just a very immersive experience. I mean, I know like films are generally, but I feel like horror in a way is more than most other
Mm,
genres, and maybe that it's a bit too confronting
mm,
for other people.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
So.
agree. I think there's a rawness there and there's a vulnerability and there's a truth that isn't explored in other genres of movies as well. Um, when you mentioned trauma, AJ, so so much of the backstory and the character development of some of the most, when you talked about Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, I was like, oh, the Golden Trio, when they were really popular. They were all centered around, ostracized people in their family or camp or society or something had happened for them to be quite isolated. And often there's a character development in the horror genre where you might get a glimpse of why that person became the perceived monster that they became. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
other genres, particularly, comedy, it doesn't speak to that as much. And when we
Mm,
think about the comedy genre, it's that contained sense of experience, whereas I think horror challenges you to go that step further into what is real, and certainly for our clients in the trauma, I think, area as well. Some of these experiences, and I'm not saying the really fantastical horror genre movies, but certainly psychological thrillers and that sort of thing. Mm. There'd be that there would certainly be a validation of experience that yes, there are terrible people in the world. Yes, this stuff sort of does happen, or it can be so frightening to be terrorized by someone. I think horror does that really cleverly.
Yeah, and some of the great horrors are and great movies are of a particular
Mm,
time, reflecting a time within
yeah,
society. Another connecting it back to Parasite, and maintaining obviously this passion that we all have for horror. There is an us versus
mm,
them
yeah,
concept. So particularly in Parasite, whichever way you look at it, there is an us versus
yeah,
them. And so if all the characters are perceived parasites in their own way, that us versus them dynamic is very real in today's society. And then just to go for the trifecta, within mental
yeah.
health, is something that Catherine and I talk about on a regular basis, and with a few things that we're trying to attempt with movie health is
Mm,
stigma.
mm,
So
mm,
there is very as I understand it, there is that us versus them element within mental health as well. Challenges that we all face. The stigma is created. You could even say that they used smell as a stigma.
mm,
To sort of mention the fact that you know people are picking up on the
mm,
differences. You smell a certain way that means a certain thing, and by positioning someone by smell, you're creating a certain stigma, and then that sets off a whole range of other things. Is there anything you guys can talk about in terms of if you want to use the us versus them concept, and the work that you do in mental health, and maybe ways that we can address
yeah,
stigma?
yeah. I'll I'll jump in if that's all right, Catherine, because I probably haven't
Yeah.
mentioned a lot of the work that myself and one of my colleagues, Michelle Bowes, are doing. Is we're providing training in sort of a specialized protocol of what's known as EMDR. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, sort of a gold standard treatment in treating PTSD, and was developed back in the, I think, late 80s, early 90s. Around 1987 was when it was first created by Francine Shapiro. But in EMDR and in the work that both Michelle and I do with our training is that we support clients to rescript the narrative of a traumatic experience. And what that rescripting of the narrative is of us going, metaphorically and creatively and imaginatively going back in time to a point of rupture that someone's experienced that's really landed for them. It's funny that you say that because often where a client lands can either be in their formative years in school, and I'm not saying all the time, but majority of the time, formative years in school or back to the age of 7 and under, where the child part of themselves experienced an us versus them experience. And that develops what we call, a touchstone memory that holds a charge to it, where the client can come away with a belief, what we call a core belief about themselves from that memory developing. That memory is developed either through an image, through emotions, through sensations in their body that becomes very real for them because it did happen, and it's still carried to current experiencing. And the us versus them, the core belief, client can walk away with a feeling of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm different, I don't belong. So I think us versus them is so real throughout all of our development that even something that can happen when we're under 7 or when we're in primary school can well carry into, 40s, 50s, 60s, where the current situation, it might be at work where someone, you know, didn't get invited to lunch with their colleagues, a response that wasn't affected by a touchstone experience could be, that's a bummer, that's a bit rude, I would have liked to go next time. But when you take into consideration all those touchstone memories that have been experienced before, which might have a flavor of I don't belong or I'm unworthy, someone may experience that really deeply and go, I'm never going to be good enough for anyone. No one ever wants to be friends with me. Why does this always happen to me? There's something wrong with me. So certainly us versus them is still something really relevant that we are challenged with all the time in lots of intersectional dynamics within our society. When we look at disability, we look at culture, we look at gender, we look at social class as well. So part of EMDR
Mm.
is changing the way that the brain stores that information and consolidates it in a way that is more adaptive moving forward.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And just quickly with my work, I guess, AJ, you make a really good point, yeah, with us versus them. In terms of stigma and shaming, I work, with psychosocial disabilities, and there is still so much stigma and shaming around that because there's a lack of understanding. And I like what you said, Amy, when, there's core beliefs of I don't belong and I'm unworthy. Those are real challenges that I work with as well. And actually, with one of my clients, we go through a book called Unmasking Autism, which is written by a doctor who has lived experience, and just the insights in that book help unshame and unstigmatize their experiences. So I think that's so important. And as social workers, we are advocates for the rights of the people that we work with. So yeah, it is just so important within the mental health space and in the work that we do, that's part of the conversation always. Like, it's just an ongoing conversation with the government, with other service providers, with people we speak to. So yeah.
Catherine, would you mind bringing us home?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so
do your thing. Do your thing.
Okay. So Parasite is a social satire. Okay, we talked about the class separation and structure, and just the genius of it. It has many themes around, our society, deceit, facades, power. And I just wanted to quickly say, I wanted to take a little note that there's a little detail of the old housekeeper's name. Her name is Moon Guang, which means the door opens and craziness comes in. So I think that little title kind of like sums up the film. But yes, and also, of course, the importance of psychological thrillers and understanding them. It's linked to mental health. Yes, thank you for speaking with us
Thank
today,
you for
Amy.
having me, and thank you for all the amazing facts. Obviously, I would love to be here in the background when you get Ho on here to talk about his interpretation of Parasite, but also the work that you guys are looking at in terms of how we can use movies more to destigmatize and just as a point when we're talking about disability, when we're looking at neurodiversity and aphantasia, movies play a huge role. So thank you both for the work that you continue to do.
Thank you.
The Movie Health Podcast is proudly supported by Telly Moods by Project Inc. Telly Moods recommends which movies and TV series to watch by matching the user's mood and real-time offer of all streaming platforms. Download Telly Moods today.